Richard, welcome to Waterstones.
Thank you very much.
I'm intrigued to start really by looking at your path into writing, because I think a lot of people watching this will recognise your face from telly and they'll know you as an actor. And I'm intrigued to know how you got into writing, whether it is as simple as the fact that, of course, you are a prolific recorder of audiobooks, but are you also the kind of person who would be reading a book whilst hanging around on film sets? Or is it just purely professional?
No, yes, all of those things, I think. I think goes right the way back to really little, being a kind of I wasn't out playing football. I was in my room playing instruments and reading like an absolute maniac. Nothing significant at that age, but I think really getting so immersed in it that when the book was over, I'd get really upset and kind of almost grieve for the loss of friends that you'd been on adventures with. I didn't know it at the time, but I think as an adult I look back and realise that was the moment I became an actor. But I think why I'm an actor is because I love storytelling, whether it's through reading other people's work, writing my own, playing music, movement, and then of course the actual practice of acting. I think it's all the same thing. I'm a storyteller, I think.
So you mentioned music there. This is important because you play which instruments?
I played the cello,
yeah.
Not very well. It sounded like a cat being strangled. But I was doing A-level music and I needed a treble instrument, so I picked the smallest instrument possible, which was the flute. So I do play those. Yeah, the flute always sounded better. The cello, it was agony.
Hard work.
Yeah.
Okay.
For other people.
But because music, as you say, does play into this as well, I think, because when you are sitting down to write, you have said that what you're doing is you're thinking about the rhythm and the sort of musicality of speech often when you're writing it down.
Yeah.
And it's not just speech, of course, it's sort of the prose as well.
Yes. Well, you'll understand this because we come from the same background,
yeah.
Which is that thing of rhythm of speech, emotion connected to vowels, and intellect connected to consonants, and that feeling of, as the emotion rises, whether it's in aggression or in love, you need certain words, and when writing doesn't serve that, you stumble. So my obsession has always been, particularly reading other people's words, some words just connect and some sentence structures connect brilliantly. Some are, a bit of a mouthful. Like Dickens, I think, is a perfect example of that extraordinarily long sentence that you think, I need to practice this a few times before I get it. And because the book was only ever going to be an audio book, I spent the whole time reading it aloud because it was likely never to be printed at that point. So if there was like an unconscious rhyme that kind of came up in the middle of the sentence, which obscured the meaning, you've had that when you go, what did he say? Missed that. So I became obsessed with the sounds of the words as much as the meaning.
In terms of what sort of, I suppose, is feeding into, because you have read lots of different types of novel as an audiobook narrator, Agatha Christie, sort of more modern thrillers like Harlan Coben, people like that.
Yeah.
I wonder what sort of styles you found maybe feeding into and inspiring your own writing, or did you have to kind of try and park some of that and find your own voice?
I did kind of think at one point, I'm going to write Steinbeck, because I just recorded The Grapes of Wrath, and it's one of those books I think I pretended I'd read and never had until I got asked to record it. Read it and went, this is just mind blowing. It was while I was writing as well, so there's parts of it I thought, I'm going down this Steinbeck road. Of course I wasn't. It was just, it was just kind of part of the marinade of inspiration. But people like Gillian Flynn inspired me. Of course, Harlan. I mean, his storytelling and his conversion into screenplay, where he understands that 12.5-minute segment where you have to put a little hook in a commercial break. It's there in his books, and it's that fairly short chapter with just a brilliant hook at the end, and you think, I'm going to just finish this one chapter and then I'm going to go to sleep. And you get to the end of the chapter, you're like, damn you, I've got to read the next one. And I love that. It really, that's why you're up at 4 a.m. under the covers with your torch. And that's how I was as a kid.
You've mentioned Harlan Coben. His name is, in fact, on the front of your book.
Yes. This is an outstanding mess. Outstanding. That's what we did.
It's all about finding the right word.
Exactly. Exactly.
But obviously you've had close contact with him through your work as an actor, and I wondered, were you able to sort of call on him to have any sort of advice whilst you were putting this together?
Yes. He didn't know it. I was sort of sneakily getting advice without saying, will you mentor me? And I did this for him. I interviewed him for his last book, I Will Find You, actually in the church next door. And I found it more nerve-wracking than being on this side, because you're like, I've got to ask him some brilliant questions. But actually watching him develop book to screen, seeing how open and democratic he was with his own material and not precious at all, there were two pieces of brilliant advice that I picked up from him. And he said, actually in that Q&A, the only bad writing is no writing. So just sit down and write and forget about whether you've got a block or not. Just start putting words on the page and something happens. That's a bit like acting. You know, sometimes you just don't, you're not in the mood. But if you're in an 8 shows a week play, you can't go, I'm not in the mood tonight. You've got to get on and do it. So it's the same concept. But he also said, I've never regretted cutting anything, and I've never put anything back into the book that I've cut.
Interesting.
Because I was struggling at that point with an editor who is brilliant, but in those first few weeks, I was ruffling my feathers a bit, like a director that's guiding me, and I'm like, why do you want me to do that? But she was absolutely right. So that piece of advice was good for me. I needed to hear it.
So let's talk about the book itself. Maybe with the title Geneva and that jacket, as we can see behind you, we should. Yeah, sorry about
that. Put that there.
We should talk about the setting, because you could have set this novel in a number of places. So what was it about Geneva that made it the perfect setting?
So because the book is about a Nobel Prize-winning scientist, and there is a controversial biotech product, which is a neural implant, and part of the crime at some point was going to be involving assisted dying. So Switzerland felt like the right place. Zurich is traditionally the home of those industries. But I needed somewhere for a slightly Bond-esque lair of the Schiller Institute. So I picked Geneva because I'd travelled there and I knew this city quite well. It's the gateway to the mountains, and so I go through Geneva a lot when I go skiing. I loved the idea of this very secretive banking empire in Switzerland. There are biotechnology. There's the campus biotech in Geneva, which is an extraordinary building, sort of nestled in the middle of all this kind of Rococo architecture. And then, of course, you're 2 hours from that remote place that I wanted. So it just felt like I'd get a lot out of that city.
And you've mentioned a Nobel Prize-winning scientist. I feel like we could have a massive digression here about how we're both massive fans of Sarah Gilbert, who is sort of Yeah, I think she's amazing. And I'm really interested to hear more about how she sort of inspired your scientist, Sarah Collier.
Did you know that, or did you pick that up from the book?
Well, I had it was one of those things where when I was reading it, I was like, I thought, oh, you're just being silly because it's the name Sarah. But then I sort of read another interview that you'd given where you had mentioned her, and I was like, oh my God, this is great, because there is something about her which is fascinating. But sorry, you tell me about.
During those early days of the pandemic, when the commission had happened, so I was dreaming up stories, trying to think of a character to base a fictional character on. On TV, I just was watching endless male politicians sort of bumbling their way through misinformation. Professor Chris Whitty accepted, but Sarah Gilbert was the one person that was just making me feel okay about everything. Watching that acceptance speech for the Rosalind Franklin Prize, and her background, her experience and knowledge, and just feeling, oh my gosh, we're in safe hands. She said in an interview, we knew we had the formula for the vaccine the same weekend that we discovered the virus. And I sort of wrote something very similar into the book, because that stuck with me. And then I thought, okay, what about somebody with that level of intellect that has risen to the top of her field, has retired, and then is afflicted with a condition that is going to make her doubt her own mind. So that to me felt like a really good person to try and, sabotage.
Well, as you say, because there's something very upright, I suppose, about her as a character in the book, which reflects Sarah Gilbert in real life. And as you say, I had the same thing during the pandemic where, especially at a time when there was that whole thing about, people have had enough of experts and all that kind of stuff. And you could see she genuinely was an expert in her field, and there were people sort of casting doubt about things left, right and centre. And I always believed her, and I always, as you say, had that feeling of safety. And it's really interesting to have in this novel somebody who has that belief, doubting it because of everything that happens to them in the novel.
And also because she just felt like somebody that didn't wheel herself out on television, waving her hands around, shouting, look at me. It was almost like, take it or leave it. Here's my advice, take it or leave it. And I love people like that.
In this novel, as I say, she sort of called in really, I suppose, to give a bit of glamour, or a bit of sort of scientific sign-off, if you like, on this neural implant that you just mentioned. Now, again, this has its roots in something real, because Elon Musk is working on a sort of neural implant, and there is a huge moral question here about this.
Yeah.
How do you feel about that? Because it must be something you must have thought about when putting it into this novel.
Yeah, they've just started human trials of his Neuralink. So I sort of, like mine's called Neurocell. At that point, it was just sort of an idea I'd heard about. But I was also interested in like augmented reality. There's a company called Magic Leap that create this extraordinary, it's not even virtual reality, it's these sort of projection glasses that project through the iris onto your retina, which is amazing. But yeah, I mean, I think I was imagining the Schiller Institute developing this technology to sort of redirect electrical impulses in dead parts of the brain, which of course is for the better good.
Yeah.
The better good, is that right? Is that the human goodness? Yeah. But you know that there will be governments out there or private companies with lots of money going, okay, can we have the access to that data of that particular implant, because we'd like to control that person's mind or harvest their information. So, and I think those people will probably be funding the pharmaceutical companies that are developing it. It's all nefarious. So I'm just interested in that. You know it's going to happen.
Yeah.
Look at our smartphones. Look how it's on the end of everybody's hand. We've just accepted it and become addicted to it.
Yeah. Okay. Slightly terrifying.
Are you frightened?
Of that. I wasn't, but I am now.
At some point in the book, though, and at some point in the writing, when I started reading back in those final drafts, I felt like one of the people in the story has had the implant, but it doesn't go down that path. But I think somebody did. So I think maybe there's a second book, a follow-up.
I was going to ask you about whether there might be a follow-up, but there's too much. Yeah, there's so much stuff there. I mean, with some of the things that we've mentioned, and again, you mentioned there about sort of early onset Alzheimer's and things like that. Presumably, again, an element of quite important research required before you could sort of set down to write it.
Yeah, I mean, it is part of the background tapestry. The Alzheimer's diagnosis is quite important for the mechanism of Sarah's journey. Trying not to spoil it too much. So yeah, I had some friends and family whose parents were suffering from various degrees of dementia. So I was picking up anecdotes without probing too personally. But I did do a little bit of online research about that. Just it was more anecdotal. I wanted the human side of it as well as the scientific stuff, because at one point there were a few chapters where Daniel was giving a lecture and it was incredibly dense and very sciencey, and my editor went, "You're losing them, so get rid of it. You know it now. You don't need to show it." Yeah.
And then with all of these elements, the character, the setting, and the sort of the tech and the ideas behind it, obviously a hugely important part of the book is the plotting, because we're looking at a thriller here.
Yeah. How
mechanical was that? And I suppose what, from your own background, were you drawing on to help you with the sort of plotting of the novel?
I think over the years I've picked up a little bit of a toolkit from working on long-form television. I mean, and in this country, long-form television is 12 episodes.
Yeah.
But the sweet spot is 6 or 8 episodes. So I've seen how story arcs have been developed and moved around and changed and re-edited to make the story better. So really plotting a book is a very similar process. I felt like it was like erecting a scaffold that gave you the sort of shape of the building, the architecture of it, and then the writing process is filling in all the bricks. But if that scaffolding can and did change a little bit, but not so drastically, because you take one thread away and then something else falls apart. There was a bit of rejigging that happened quite late on, but once you know why something needs to happen, you can move it around a little bit. But I did quite enjoy doing that, because solidifying what each chapter needed to do meant that I could write when I was working on other things. So I could write in the trailer, I could write on aeroplanes. I was doing a film down in Spain, so I was writing it out in Seville. How glamorous it really was. But it meant I had like a little paragraph of this is what's got to happen in the chapter and this is why it needs to happen, so I wouldn't veer off the path too much.
Smart. Good thinking. having been through the experience of writing this book, a first for you, so I was going to ask whether you were tempted to go through this whole process again and write more, and in fact whether there'll be more in this sort of vein or indeed in this storyline.
So the minute I finished, and it had gone out, the audiobook had gone out, and the manuscript had gone around to publishers, and I'm sitting there twiddling my thumbs thinking, I kind of miss that thing I did on a Sunday morning, and I miss having characters, working in my head and stories that I missed it. So I immediately said, can I write another one? Through exactly the same process, and they said, well, have you got any more story ideas? So I offered them two. I've offered them a follow-up to Geneva and a complete standalone novel. So I'm doing another one now. It's a completely unrelated book, but I've got a treatment for a follow-up to Geneva in my head.
Do either of these feature a sort of frustrated cellist?
Yes. Funny you should say that. Yes. The book is called The Cut. It's going to be released next week. The audiobook is called The Cut. And it's about childhood, really, and a sort of very traumatic event, a murder that happens in childhood, and all of the children develop into quite distorted adults because of it. So it incorporates the making of film, and also one of the characters is not a frustrated cellist. He's actually very good.
Okay.
But it's crippling him.
See? Write what you know.
Yes, exactly, write what you know.
Richard, it's been fantastic to speak to you about Geneva. Thank you so much.
Thanks very much. Nice to see you again.